Queen Pryla screamed as the primitive human rammed the airlock door open with his shoulder. The huge ape was supposedly here to rescue her from the slaver ship, but the dumb beast looked barely evolved enough to breathe. Frank Hicks blinked at her beauty and power. He'd never seen an alien queen before, but he didn't have time to gawk. He was humanity's last hope. A day before, Frank had been chowing on greasy eggs at the rusty spaceport when the urgent message came in. The Galactic Council, those prissy alien fucks on their shining space station, had a problem. A big one. Queen Pryla of the Brunali Empire had been snatched by a rogue slaver faction during peace talks. Her husband, King Zorgan, was frothing at the mouth to get her back, but invading would spark all-out war. So they needed a nobody to sneak in alone and pull her blue ass out. Someone expendable, someone primitive enough to think different than the brainy aliens in charge. And that nobody was Frank. Billions would die if this went tits up, but Frank had stared down death too many times. He ate impossible missions for breakfast. He was a human. Doing the crazy shit no one else would was his specialty. Those aliens could keep their tech and their empires. Humans had balls. So now Frank faced the pissed-off queen, plasma still dripping from his shoulder launcher. Time to see if a knuckle-dragger from the galactic ghetto could save the day. Frank's boots thudded against the grimy metal floor of the space station as he moved through its seedy underbelly, following the intel that had led him here. The air stunk of booze, sweat, and desperation. Aliens of all shapes and sizes milled about, but Frank kept his head down, not wanting to draw attention. He ducked into a dimly lit bar, sliding onto a stool and ordering a drink. The bartender, a grizzled Brunali with a scar across his face, leaned in close as he set the glass down. "You asking about the Crimson Claw?" he muttered. "Bad idea, pal." Frank slid a credit chip across the counter. "Let's just say I'm not a fan of the current regime. Heard this Zaroth guy might have a different vision." The bartender pocketed the chip, glancing around warily. "Zaroth's a real piece of work, used to be some hotshot general, until he got a little too brutal for the king's liking. Now he's got his own little army, the Crimson Claw." "And the Queen?" Frank asked, sipping his drink. "Word is, Zaroth's using her as leverage, wants to force the king to give up the throne so he can take over. Crazy bastard might just pull it off too." Frank nodded, the pieces falling into place. He needed to get inside the Crimson Claw and fast. Posing as a disillusioned Brunali mercenary, Frank made contact with the group. In a grungy training pit on a remote moon, he showcased his combat skills, taking down opponent after opponent with brutal efficiency. His unorthodox human fighting style caught the eye of the Crimson Claw's leadership. During a high-stakes raid on a rival faction's outpost, Frank saw his chance. As the mission teetered on the brink of failure, he purposely sabotaged a key objective, then pulled a daring maneuver to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Graxus, Zaroth's cunning second-in-command, had no choice but to rely on Frank's quick thinking. As they stood amidst the smoking ruins of the outpost, Graxus clapped a hand on Frank's shoulder. "Not bad for a newcomer," he growled. "Zaroth will want to meet you himself, and I've got just the job to test your loyalty." Days later, Frank found himself patrolling the high-security wing of the Crimson Claw's stronghold, decked out in the blood-red armor of Zaroth's elite guard. Somewhere in this maze of corridors, Queen Pryla was being held. Frank just needed to bide his time and wait for his moment to strike. But as he stood guard, a niggling doubt wormed its way into Frank's mind. The Galactic Council were a bunch of preening politicians, but could they really be so incompetent as to let their plans leak? Or was there something more sinister at play? Frank shook his head, pushing the thought aside. He had a job to do. The Queen, the Crimson Claw, whatever traitor might be lurking in the shadows, he'd deal with them all, one at a time. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was improvising in the face of impossible odds. And impossible odds were what Frank lived for. Adjusting his red Crimson Claw armor, Frank strode confidently down the high-security wing, his eyes scanning for any sign of the captive queen. As he turned a corner, he froze. There, In a cell guarded by two heavily armed Brunali was Queen Pryla herself. But she was not the delicate flower he had expected. Pryla stood tall and proud, her piercing gaze locking onto Frank as he approached. She had the bearing of a warrior, not a damsel in distress. "Are you there?" Pryla called out, her voice strong and commanding. "I haven't seen you before. Who are you?" Frank hesitated, then stepped closer to the cell. "Name's Frank, I'm new around here." Pryla's eyes narrowed. "You're no Brunali. What are you really doing here?" Frank glanced at the guards, then leaned in close. "I'm here to get you out. The Galactic Council sent me." "The Council?" Pryla scoffed. "And why should I trust you?" "Because I think there's a traitor on the inside, someone high up who sold you out to Zaroth." Pryla was silent for a moment, considering. "Fine, but if this is a trick, I'll kill you myself." Over the next few days, Frank and Pryla met in secret, huddled in dark corners of the stronghold as they planned her escape. Frank was impressed by Pryla's sharp mind and fierce determination. She was no damsel. She was a queen, through and through. As they worked together, a grudging respect grew between them. They were from different worlds, but they shared the same iron will, the same refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. But their time was running out. Zaroth's paranoia was growing by the day, and he had ordered Graxus to root out any potential spies. Frank knew his cover wouldn't hold much longer. They had to act fast. Just as they were finalizing their plan, an explosion shook the stronghold to its core. Alarms blared as Zaroth's men scrambled to their posts. Frank ran to the nearest viewport and his jaw dropped. The Brunali royal fleet had arrived, and they were bombarding the base with everything they had. Frank turned to Pryla, a grim smile on his face. "Looks like your husband decided to crash the party." Pryla's eyes flashed with determination. "Then let's not disappoint him." Together they fought their way through the chaos of the stronghold, Frank's plasma rifle blasting through Zaroth's elite warriors as Pryla dispatched them with deadly efficiency. They were an unstoppable team, human and Brunali, united against a common foe. But as they neared the escape pods, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Graxus, his weapon aimed squarely at Frank's chest. "I knew there was something off about you," Graxus snarled. "You're no Brunali. You're a filthy human spy." Frank and Pryla exchanged a glance, then charged forward, weapons blazing. Graxus was a skilled fighter, but he was no match for their combined strength. In a fierce clash of plasma and steel, they brought the traitor down, leaving him unconscious and battered on the deck. Panting, Frank and Pryla staggered into the escape pod, slamming the hatch shut behind them. As the pod jettisoned away from the doomed stronghold, Frank saw a Galactic Council ship waiting in the distance, ready to take them to safety. They had done it. Against all odds, they had completed their impossible mission, but as Frank looked at Pryla, he knew their fight was far from over. The traitor on the Council was still out there, and they wouldn't rest until they brought them to justice. Frank slumped into a chair in the Galactic Council ship's briefing room, the adrenaline from their harrowing escape still coursing through his veins. Pryla sat beside him, her regal bearing undiminished by the ordeal they had just endured. The Council representatives, a motley assortment of aliens from across the galaxy, looked grim as they entered the room. The lead representative, a spindly creature with a face like a praying mantis, spoke first. "We have much to discuss," it said, its voice a reedy whisper. "King Zorgan's attack on the Crimson Claw stronghold was not authorized by this council." Frank leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean? I thought the whole point of this mission was to rescue the Queen and take down Zaroth." The mantis-like alien shook its head. "Zorgan acted on his own, driven by his desperate need to save his mate. His reckless actions have upset the delicate balance of power in the galaxy and risked exposing our covert operations." Pryla's eyes flashed with anger. "My husband may be impulsive, but his heart is in the right place. He was only doing what he thought was necessary to save me and our people." The Council representatives exchanged uneasy glances. "Be that as it may," the lead representative said, "we cannot allow such unilateral actions to go unchecked. That is why we have a new mission for you both." Frank and Prylar listened intently as the council outlined their task: to escort King Zorgon back to the Brunali homeworld and ensure a peaceful resolution to the crisis. Frank couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something about this whole situation didn't sit right with him. As they prepared for their journey to the Brunali royal palace, Frank and Prylar pored over the data they had gathered during their time in the Crimson Claw stronghold. A pattern began to emerge, one that pointed to a traitor within the council itself. "Look at this," Frank said, pointing to a series of coded transmissions. These messages were sent from a secure council channel, but they're using a Crimson Claw encryption key. Prylar's eyes widened. That means someone on the council is working with Zaroth, someone high up with access to top-secret information. The implications were staggering. If a council member was in league with Zaroth, then the entire galaxy was at risk. Frank and Prylar knew they had to act fast to uncover the identity of the traitor and stop them before it was too late. When they arrived at the Brunali royal palace, they were greeted not by a relieved King Zorgon, but by an enraged one. The king stormed into the reception hall, his face contorted with fury. "How dare you interfere in the affairs of the Brunali Empire?" he roared, jabbing a finger at Frank. "You humans think you can just swoop in and save the day, but all you've done is undermine our sovereignty and put our people at risk." Frank stood his ground, meeting Zorgon's gaze unflinchingly. "Your Majesty, I understand your anger, but we have reason to believe that there is a traitor within the Galactic Council, someone who has been working with Zaroth to destabilize your empire and seize control of the galaxy." Zorgon scoffed. "And why should I believe you? For all I know, you could be the traitor sent here to sow discord and chaos." Prylar stepped forward, placing a calming hand on her husband's arm. "My love, please listen to them. They risked their lives to save me, and I trust them implicitly." Zorgon's gaze softened as he looked at his mate, but the suspicion in his eyes remained. Frank knew he had to tread carefully, to use all his diplomatic skills to convince the king that the real threat came from within the council and the remnants of Zaroth's Crimson Claw. The queen glanced around the room, then leaned in close. "There is something else you should know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The reason Zaroth was so determined to capture me, the reason he was willing to risk everything, it's because I possess an ancient artifact, one that holds the key to a weapon of unimaginable power." Frank and Zorgon exchanged a look of shock and disbelief. Prylar continued, her voice urgent. "This artifact, if activated, could destroy entire star systems in the blink of an eye. Zaroth sought to use it to blackmail the Council, to bend the galaxy to his will." The weight of Prylar's revelation hung heavy in the air. Zorgon's anger drained away, replaced by a grim determination. He turned to Frank, his eyes hard. "Here it seems we have a common enemy," the king said, his voice grave. "I will work with you and the council to bring this traitor to justice and put an end to Zaroth's machinations once and for all." Frank nodded, relief washing over him. With the king's support and Prylar's insider knowledge, they finally had a chance to unravel the web of deceit that threatened to plunge the galaxy into chaos. But he knew the road ahead would be far from easy. Frank, Prylar, and Zorgon huddled around a holomap, their faces grim. They had to draw the traitor out, and the ancient artifact was the perfect bait. "We'll leak word that Prylar and I have the key to the weapon," Frank said. "Set up a meeting on some remote rock. When they show, we'll be waiting." Prylar nodded. "It's risky, but it's our best shot. We have to end this now." They chose a desolate, uninhabited planet on the fringes of Brunali space. The trap was set. On the day of the meeting, Frank and Prylar stood on the planet's barren surface, the artifact hidden away. A ship landed and a figure emerged. Varos, the Galactic Council's head of security. Frank's gut clenched. He'd never trusted that slimy bastard. "Well, well," Varos sneered, "the primitive and the pampered princess. I've waited a long time for this." Prylar's eyes flashed. "You're the traitor. You sold out your own people, you piece of filth." The Council's way is weak, Varos spat. Zeroth understands true power, and now that power will be mine. On cue, a dozen ships dropped out of the sky. Zaroth and his Crimson Claw. Frank, Pryla, and Zorgon drew their weapons as all hell broke loose. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the battlefield as Frank dove for cover. He came up firing, dropping 2 Crimson Claw goons. Beside him, Pryla was poetry in motion, her blade dancing and plasma rifle barking. Zorgon's battle cry rang out as he charged into the fray, scattering foes like chaff. But Varos's treachery ran deep. Loyal Council forces turned on their own, caught between 2 fronts. Frank gritted his teeth and fought on. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were human and brunali. They would not yield. A stray shot struck the artifact's container. Frank saw it crack, an eerie glow leaking out. His heart seized. If that thing blew, it'd take half the planet with it. He surged forward, scooping up the artifact. The heat seared his hands, but he held tight. Ahead, a cliff loomed, a churning, molten pit below. The planet's core. Pryla saw him running, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Frank, no!" she screamed. Zorgon roared denial. But it was the only way. Frank looked back at these aliens who'd become closer than blood. "It's been an honor," he rasped. "Remember humanity. Remember what we're capable of." And with that he leaped. The artifact pulsed as he plummeted, down into the fiery embrace of the planet's heart. The flames engulfed him, and Frank Hicks knew no more. Above, the battle stuttered to a halt as a brilliant flare burst from the molten pit. The artifact's destructive energy dissipated, its threat extinguished in the planet's core. In the sudden silence, Varos and Zaroth found themselves surrounded. Staring down the barrels of a dozen plasma rifles, they had no choice but to surrender. Pryla and Zorgon stood on the cliff's edge, staring into the depths that had claimed the bravest being they'd ever known. Tears tracked down Pryla's face, but her eyes shone with fierce pride. "Goodbye, Frank," she whispered. "The galaxy owes you a debt it can never repay." The Galactic Council convened in somber emergency session. The traitor had been within their ranks all along, and a human had paid the price to stop him. As a shaken galaxy grappled with the fallout, whispers spread of the primitive, who had sacrificed everything for a people not his own. The name Frank Hicks passed from lip to ear, an impossible story many struggled to believe. But for those who had fought beside him, who had witnessed his unwavering courage and unyielding spirit, one truth crystallized. Humanity might be young, might be rough around the edges, but they had a strength, a fire, that the galaxy desperately needed. Pryla and Zorgon returned to the Brunali homeworld, forever changed. A new age was dawning, one of unity, of transparency, of purpose, and at the heart of it all, driving them forward, was the memory of a single human who had taught them the true meaning of sacrifice. Frank Hicks was gone, but his legacy would echo through the stars for generations to come. The primitive had shown them the way, now it was up to them to follow it. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.